The war had ended, but for the women dragged across the ocean, surrender was no release. They arrived at Fort Campbell not as guests, but as captives, nurses who had once worked in makeshift hospitals under bombed-out roofs, now herded through barbed gates with numbers stitched to their sleeves. The Americans called them prisoners of war, though many whispered they were little more than shadows of the Reich's collapse. Greta, a young nurse from Cologne, clutched the strap of her satchel as she shuffled into the camp. Her hands still bore faint stains from iodine, her nails ragged from months of scrubbing wounds with dirty rags. She had treated boys no older than her brother, soldiers bleeding out on floors covered with straw, and she had watched them die one after another when there was nothing left to give. Now she stood staring at the American Medical Building, a sturdy structure near the center of camp. Its windows gleamed with glass unbroken by bombs. Curtains hung in neat folds. Outside, a Red Cross flag flapped lazily in the summer breeze. The guard gestured briskly. "You nurse in there." His English was halting, but the meaning clear. The morning brought Greta's first glimpse of what would become the most astonishing discovery of her captivity. Following Sergeant Hayes toward the orientation building, the group passed a long, low structure from which emerged the rhythmic sounds of activity and the unmistakable scent of antiseptic. "What is that building?" Liesel asked in broken English. "The hospital wing," Hayes replied matter-of-factly. "One of our most important facilities." Through the building's windows, Greta caught sight of something that made her stop walking entirely. Rows of beds filled with patients, their wounds wrapped in clean bandages, operated on by both American staff and what appeared to be other prisoners working voluntarily. "Those supplies," Greta began, then stopped, lacking words for what she was witnessing. "Full medical inventory," Hayes explained, noticing their amazement. "Penicillin, sulfa drugs, surgical equipment. Each ward can treat 20 patients simultaneously." The concept defied comprehension. In Germany, medical care meant hours of makeshift treatments with precious supplies rationed by the government. These facilities promised complete care using abundant resources and unlimited access to medicine. "Impossible, whispered Frida. No one has such supplies." "Would you like to see them in operation?" Hayes asked with obvious professionalism. Inside the medical facility, Greta experienced something approaching religious revelation. The wards were even more impressive up close. Gleaming equipment with sterile instruments arranged in precise order, hot water heated to temperatures that would have been impossible to achieve by hand. Dorothy Jenkins, the facility supervisor, demonstrated the operation with enthusiastic precision. "You add supplies here, follow protocol here, and the system handles everything else. Hot water, sterilization, proper disposal." "Proper disposal?" Greta asked, mesmerized. "Watch this." Jenkins opened a cabinet that had just completed its sterilization cycle. The instruments inside were perfectly clean, requiring only brief air drying rather than the day-long process familiar to the prisoners. A German nurse named Marta, who had been working in the facility for several weeks, approached their group. "Greta, you will not believe this. They pay us to learn these procedures. American currency for medical work that is more advanced than anything we did at home. They pay prisoners," Frida whispered. "Script that can be used in the camp store. But more than that, they're teaching us skills." Jenkins says these standards are common in American military hospitals. Ordinary facilities maintain them. 3 weeks into her imprisonment, Greta stood beside a hospital bed, carefully preparing bandages under Sergeant Hayes' patient supervision. The routine had become familiar, but the wonder had not faded. Every procedure still felt like witnessing something impossible. "Perfect technique, Greta, est prête. You are becoming one of our best medical assistants." Around the ward, a dozen German women worked alongside American staff, their initial amazement replaced by growing expertise. The transformation went beyond technical skills. These women moved with confidence that had not existed during their first terrified days at Fort Campbell. "Hayes," Greta said carefully in improving English, "I have a question. These supplies, how many American hospitals have them?" Oh, about 70% of military facilities. More in stateside hospitals, fewer in field units. But the number's growing rapidly. Greta tried to process the mathematics. If America could spare complete medical equipment for a prison camp, while 70% of military facilities maintain them privately, what did that suggest about American medical capacity? That afternoon brought an unexpected demonstration. Hayes announced that several prisoners would receive advanced training on newer surgical techniques being delivered to the camp. 6 months later, Greta received permission to write her first letter home through Red Cross channels. Sitting in the medical facility during her break, surrounded by the gentle hum of sterilization equipment, she struggled to find words that would not sound like fantasy to her family in war-torn Germany. "Dear honored family," she began carefully, "I am healthy and well-treated. The Americans have facilities here that demonstrate their medical capabilities far exceed what we were told." How could she explain that prisoners had access to equipment most German civilians had never imagined? That she had learned to operate systems which completed in minutes what took German nurses hours of exhausting labor? Greta called Marta, a former factory supervisor who had become the camp's unofficial medical coordinator. "Hayes wants to discuss the new training program with you." In the supervisor's office, Sergeant Hayes spread out technical manuals and photographs showing even more advanced surgical procedures. "Greta, your medical aptitude is exceptional. We are starting a program to train selected prisoners as advanced care technicians." She pointed to detailed diagrams. "These skills will be valuable wherever you end up after the war." The implications were clear. The Americans expected some prisoners to remain in the United States, establishing lives in a country where advanced medical care was becoming standard necessity. "Hayes," Greta asked hesitantly, "may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Your family, do they have access to medical care like this?" Hayes smiled. "We have a small clinic near home. My husband uses it regularly since returning from overseas duty. Cost about $200 yearly for family coverage. Expensive, but worth it for the care it provides." $200 represented more money than Greta had earned in 2 years as a textile worker in Germany. The casual mention of such an expenditure revealed economic realities that challenged everything she had understood about relative national prosperity. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Captain Robert Morrison, the camp's medical education coordinator, toured the facility with obvious pride in the program's success. "Ladies," he announced to the assembled workers, "I have news about post-war opportunities. Several medical organizations have expressed interest in hiring trained technicians, regardless of national origin." The room fell silent. The possibility of remaining in America, working with the miraculous equipment they had learned to operate, seemed both appealing and treasonous. Captain Morrison asked Marta carefully, "What about our families in Germany? That is a personal decision each of you will make when the war ends. But I want you to know that America values skilled workers who understand modern medical technology." After the captain left, the women continued their work in contemplative silence. Each procedure represented not just patient care, but a glimpse into a future where manual labor might be replaced by systematic efficiency. "Greta," Marta said quietly, "sometimes I wonder if we are prisoners or students." Looking around the facility at equipment that seemed miraculous, American supervisors who treated them with professional respect, and fellow prisoners learning skills that might provide futures beyond anything possible in devastated Germany, Greta realized the distinction had become meaningless. She was being educated by her captors in technologies that proved their civilization superiority more effectively than any military victory could have achieved. 1 year after her arrival at Fort Campbell, Greta stood before a congressional committee in Washington, testifying about prisoner treatment and medical education programs. The irony was not lost on her. A former enemy explaining to American legislators why teaching prisoners advanced health care served national interests. "Yamamoto," said Representative Thompson from Kentucky, "you have described extensive medical training provided to German prisoners. Some congressmen question whether such resources should have been devoted to enemy nationals." Greta, now wearing a simple but well-tailored dress, and speaking confident English, chose her words carefully. Congressman, learning to operate American medical equipment taught us more about your country's capabilities than any propaganda could have achieved. Explain that statement. When I arrived, I believed American healthcare was primitive compared to German medical systems. Operating advanced surgical equipment showed me the reverse was true. Germany's entire medical infrastructure could not produce facilities like those casually provided to prisoners. In the gallery, she spotted Sergeant Hayes and several other Fort Campbell staff members who traveled to Washington to support the program's continuation. Representative Davis from California leaned forward. Are you suggesting that demonstrating medical superiority was a form of psychological warfare? I am suggesting that experiencing American healthcare convinced me and many others that resistance was futile. Not because we were beaten, but because we had been competing against a civilization we had never understood. The questioning continued for 2 hours with Greta explaining how medical equipment had served as a window into American healthcare capability that made German wartime propaganda appear absurd in retrospect. Greta asked Chairman Williams, "How many of your fellow prisoners chose to remain in America?" Approximately 70% applied for permanent residency, not from fear of returning to Germany, but from desire to participate in a society where ordinary families own medical resources we had considered miraculous. After the hearing, Greta met with Captain Morrison and Sergeant Hayes to discuss the program's future. The committee seemed supportive, Morrison observed. Your testimony helped them understand that medical education serves strategic purposes beyond simple prisoner welfare. Greta, I have news. Presbyterian Hospital has offered you a position as regional training coordinator for their new international operations. They want someone who understands both American technology and German work culture. The offer represented everything Greta had never dared imagine. A career built on skills learned in captivity, working with equipment that had once seemed impossible in a country that had transformed her from enemy to valued employee. There is one condition, she said carefully. I want to help establish training centers in Germany. That is exactly what they hope you will do, Morrison replied. Bridge the gap between American innovation and German implementation. 6 months later, Greta stood in a new training facility in Munich, watching German women experience the same amazement she had felt upon first seeing advanced medical equipment at Fort Campbell. Can we really take one home? Asked a young worker, echoing Greta's own first question. Someday, Greta replied, remembering her journey from prisoner to instructor. But first, let me teach you how they work. As the familiar hum of sterilization equipment filled the Munich facility, Greta reflected on the strange path that had brought her here, from enemy prisoner to cultural ambassador, spreading American medical technology through the patient instruction she had received from captors who had understood that true victory came not from defeating enemies, but from transforming them into willing participants in a superior civilization. 2 years after establishing the Munich Training Center, Greta received a letter that would change everything again. The envelope bore the seal of the United Nations, and inside was an invitation that seemed impossible. The international organization wanted her to testify about technology transfer as a tool for post-war reconstruction. Greta, the letter read, your unique experience bridging American medical methods with German implementation makes you invaluable for discussions about peaceful technology sharing between former enemy nations. Sitting in her Munich apartment, surrounded by photographs from Fort Campbell and technical manuals for the latest American medical equipment, Greta marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she had been a prisoner learning to operate surgical tools. Now, she was being asked to help shape international policy. Greta, said her assistant Liesel, entering with the day's correspondence. The Siemens representatives are here for the demonstration. In the training center's main hall, a dozen German executives watched as Greta demonstrated the latest American sterilization system, the same model she had first encountered as a prisoner, now being manufactured under license in Germany. Gentlemen, she explained in formal German, this technology represents more than medical innovation. It demonstrates a philosophy of abundance rather than scarcity, efficiency rather than endurance. Herr Mueller, Siemens chief engineer, raised his hand. Greta, our studies suggest these systems require too much electricity and water for practical German hospital use. Greta smiled, remembering similar objections from the early days. Sir, that assumes German hospitals will remain as resource-constrained as they were during wartime. American facilities did not always have abundant electricity either. Infrastructure can be built to support improved medical standards. After the demonstration, she walked through Munich's rebuilding districts, noting the gradual changes. Electric wires were being strung to more neighborhoods. Water systems expanded and small medical supply shops began appearing. Signs that Germany was slowly catching up to American healthcare standards. 10 years after her capture, Greta stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from 60 nations about the role of technology transfer in post-war reconstruction. Behind her, a large photograph showed Fort Campbell's medical facility, the place where former enemies had first learned to operate equipment that would transform their understanding of what civilization could offer. Honorable delegates, she began, I stand before you as proof that the most powerful weapon against future conflict is not military strength, but the patient sharing of knowledge that lifts all nations toward prosperity. The medical equipment taught us more about American capabilities than any interrogation could have achieved.